Hey there, and welcome to my beginner tips video. First of all, I have to say that some of those tips are quite subjective, and you can easily find players who are exceptions, do things different way, and it still works just fine. Now, I believe that the way I do it is just the most common way for many professional players, and if applied early enough, it can save some of your practice time or boost the speed of your skills development. Those are things that I would like to share with myself if I would be able to go years back, meet myself at the stage of beginning to play the guitar. So I hope you'll enjoy the video. Watching people grab their guitars for the very first time, I can often notice they push the neck downwards, like this. And partially it's understandable because electric guitar is a specific kind of instrument with a thin body, and it doesn't feel that much natural when you grab it for the first time. So very often we can see this happening. Now, what's wrong about that? For the right hand, it's not that much critical. In fact, it affects the angles of pick and the wrist, but it does not take our right hand away from the reach of strings. But for the left hand, it's a totally different story. Our left hand needs to be able to compensate the length difference between fingers. So when we try to hold all 4 fingers, each on its own fret, we will have to rotate the wrist and push our elbow towards the body to make the length difference between index and pinky finger compensated. Now, additional thing breaks through when we try to hold basic chord shapes like C major or G major, E major. We can see that our finger has to do 2 things at the same time. First thing is simply to press the note, but it also has to be rounded so it won't touch other strings. We don't want the same finger to work as a noise gate and string pressure at the same time, not in case of the chords. So the practical execution of any kind of guitar licks or chords demands us to push the neck a little up rather than pull it down. The way I hold the guitar at the moment is on my right leg, and it's quite common now. It feels comfortable for me, but there is also additional way of holding guitar, and it's from the classical education, classical guitar playing, and it's holding the guitar on the left leg this way. But what's the purpose? In both cases, the purpose is to make our left hand comfortable and able to reach frets or advanced shapes. Now, with this kind of approach, we're not. When we take a look at humans' natural way to grab things, we'll notice that it happens between the print sides of our fingers, right? Just like this. Now, that's exactly what happens with the pick when a player meets it for the first time. He usually put it between his thumb and print side of index finger. Now, that's not necessarily the best way to hold the pick, and though there are players who use this kind of pick grip and it seems to work just fine for them. But I'll try to explain you why a lot more of players have abandoned this and keep holding their pick on the side of index finger. When we hold the pick this way, we have our index finger a lot more flexible. So we have to deliver more strength to just keep the pick steady between fingers. Now, if we hold the pick on the side of our index finger, we put a lot less strength. So the strength we save can be used to boost our picking speed, for example, and it really makes sense. Now, from the practical point of view, me as a beginner player had been holding the pick the way I showed you at the beginning, and I can tell you where the problem was for me. As long as I was playing chords like, there was no problem. The pick angle was proper and I felt comfortable playing this. But as soon as I was trying to add some kind of alternate picking runs in between those strummed chords, I had problems to switch the angle of my pick. And I was doing something like you can see on the screen. I had to push my index finger a lot beyond the comfort zone, and it was an unnecessary tension just to get a different pick angle to play different things. Now, once one of my older friends told me in a studio how he holds the pick, I have found that there are a lot more players doing this exactly the same way as he did, and I decided to switch. So it took me around 6 months to be able to play things I was earlier able to play. But after those 6 months, I was able to skip even further, and that made a lot of profit to my overall playing. So, for example, playing some strummed power chords, it felt much more comfortable to me than playing something like this. I can't even execute it precisely at this moment. So those were my ideas, those were my reasons to switch to this kind of picking. And if you take a close look at famous players, you will notice that most of them really do hold the pick between the side of index finger and the thumb instead of holding it on the print side, which feels a lot more natural at the beginning, at least. To become a professional player, you don't necessarily have to be able to play with the speed of the light, right? The difference between beginner and professional performance are the details. It's all about everything that happens around the note we play. Let's point out some specific things for professional performance, like perfect timing, perfect intonation, perfect control of the tone from a hand, and the ability to play clean. So let's see what can we do with our left hand to boost our ability to play clean. Generally, we have two modes of operating with our left hand. First mode is a kind of classical, where our fingers are being rounded. The idea is to press the string without touching any other. This way we can have all 6 ringing out freely. Now, as soon as we press on the distortion, we will notice that every string that is not being touched will ring out and generate some unwanted noise. So to avoid this, we need to flatten our fingers. And I have a few hard rules on this. My main noise gating tool will be my index finger, which will press the string, B note in this case, and will touch all the strings below. So we have something like and I'm also using its tip to touch the 6th string. So, for example, if this would be a B note for a kind of solo playing, I would play it like this. Now, the cool thing about this kind of left-hand approach is that I can actually play all 6 strings and the B note is the one that rules and nothing else breaks through aside from some percussive kind of flavor. Now, if I play a power chord, E power chord for example, I can still use bottom part of my index finger to mute those high strings, but I won't touch the 6th string with my tip. This way you will hear only 2 strings, while I still play on all 6 strings with my right hand. It has a lot of sense when you're on stage and you want to feel free instead of targeting particular strings with your right hand. Now, I do exactly the same with all other fingers depending on the kind of lick I play. So it's always one of those to touch the strings below the string I play, and one of those touching the string above with its tip, like in this case. So this way I'm sure that nothing breaks through, and even if I leave a note for a longer sustain, I can still move with my guitar and it will not affect its sustain. Now let's give an opposite example of how this would sound without any muting application. Let's play some notes on high strings. So you can hear all low strings cutting through the mix on the breaks. Or you can notice that if we leave any of those strings that are not in use without any muting, then they simply cut through as a unwanted noise. In the previous part, we've been discussing on how to adjust our left hand to mute unwanted noises. Now there are situations when the reach of our left hand is not wide enough to take care of low strings, and that's when our right hand comes in. Essentially, we have 2 parts of our right palm that takes care of muting job. First part is the one that we use for regular palm muted runs. To make this happen, we simply rest our hand right behind the saddles, close to the bridge, and it's in a constant contact with low strings. Now, second method is the soft part near the thumb, and it's most often being used by players who rotate their wrists to the left, like this. Now, the choice is up to you. It all depends on what you play, on particular licks, solo or rhythm modes, but you can use one of those or both at the same time, depending what feels comfortable for you. Now, there is additional situation when we use the side of our fingers as well. And it's a situation when we play rhythm parts with breaks with a very high amount of distortion, and it's like our left hand is not enough to make a full silence in between our playing. So we can additionally rest the side of our whole right hand on the strings in the breaks. It really helps to make clean and silent breaks between notes. So that's essentially how right hand muting works. So, how to keep my guitar in tune for most of the time? First of all, let's start from the obvious. Its technical condition has a lot to do with it. If some elements are worn out, have scratchy edges, like saddles on the bridge, they need to be replaced. Second thing we can do is to lubricate the friction points. And those are pressure trees on the headstock, the nut, saddles, and the bridge plate. Now, if you keep them lubricated on a regular basis, you can not only improve your tuning stability, but also have less problems with strings breakage. Now, that's the one thing. Another thing is how we tune the guitar. And I have a few hard rules on this. They are based on keeping your final move of the tuning peg as an up move. I mean, increasing the tension of the string, and rechecking by stretching the same string. Let's make an example of how it works in practice. I'll detune the G string way above its pitch. And then I'll do the opposite to what I said before. I'll go back by releasing the tension. Okay, now let's see what happens when I'll try to bend the string. As you can hear, it totally lost its pitch. Now I'll go back to its pitch using only up motion. I'll recheck by stretching the string. And now I'll bend again. As you can hear, it always goes back to its pitch. So every time I make sure that I have a good proportion of pulling the string up with the pitch and restretching it if I go below the 0.0 of its perfect pitch, then I'll have more comfort while playing a solo of my life and not worrying about the string to lose its pitch. So, what's the deal about our fretting hand? Things should be simple. We have a string, we have a fret, and we have a finger to put on it. Now, there are a few things to know on how to make it properly. First of all is the finger's placement. Our finger should be placed right behind the fret, not on the piece of metal, not far from it, but right behind it. This way, we will use less pressure to get good execution of that particular note and without over pressuring that will cause pitch issues. Now, second thing is the mentioned over pressuring. Let's give an example. This is a single note, but when we take this to a full chord, it's even more visible. This is something that is visible a lot in beginners' first recording takes. I mean, the guitar can be decent, tuning device can be decent, and we can be very effective while tuning open strings. But some of the tuning issues visible in our takes can be caused by overpressuring the notes. So always make sure to place your finger as close to the fret as possible and to press it only as much as necessary. Also, keep in mind that there are hard shapes that doesn't let us put all of the fingers exactly behind the frets. So we would have to use a little more pressure. But let's treat this as an exception. This particular tip relates mostly to distortion, but making some good habits won't harm your clean tone playing as well. So let's start from an example. Okay. Does it sound familiar? I've heard it a lot of times, especially at the beginner stage. So first thing to realize is that the silence in music is same important as all the notes we play. And it's also a kind of act of respect for the listener. To avoid all those unwanted noises, scratches, or random notes, we simply should keep our hands steady while there are breaks. Like this. Also, we should not release our fingers from the fretboard, because on the distortion, leaving them free creates some noise as well. So we do not want this to happen. Bending, from its definition, seems to be a very simple thing. We bend the string to change its pitch. So, where did my idea to make a tip on it come from? Well, I've seen a lot of beginner players doing this. Okay, so if we compare this to a definition, there's nothing wrong about it. But why do we force single finger while we can use all available fingers, the ones that are behind the one we bend? This way, we split our strength into 3 fingers, not just a single one. And we also have a better control on the pitch. There's an additional information. The same thing works for vibrato technique. Of course, there is an exception, and it's our index finger that has no other fingers behind it, so we use it as a standalone. And sometimes we simply rotate the wrist to rest the part of our left hand on the side of the neck and treat it as a supporting point. When we hear the word intonation, we usually think of adjusting saddles on the bridge. But let's assume our instruments have been set up properly, and let's take a look at other things that affect intonation at the stage of tuning process or the playing itself. First of all, we need to realize that the guitar is not a perfect instrument pitch-wise. Tuning process is always a kind of compromise. So first thing to consider is to give some extra few minutes on tuning before the show or your recordings. Why? Let's see. Let's assume that I have tuned open E string to the tuning device. Okay, so you can hear it's let's say in perfect pitch. Now, what happens when I hit the first fret and second fret, third fret, fourth fret? So what you have seen is all the fretted notes being with a higher pitch compared to open string. And now you need to ask yourself a question: what is better, having all those 4 notes in a perfect pitch and having the open string being slightly off, or having perfect pitch on the open string and having all the other notes on frets a little off the pitch? Now, let's take a look at how instruments are being made these days. To be honest, most of inexpensive guitars are being done on the CNC laser cutter. So there is a small risk that the distances between frets are being done wrong. So very often we can trust the frets more than the open strings. And Even if you think you have tuned your guitar quite well before the recording, it can still sound a little off tune because it's always worth to recheck on the frets. So let's try to make a kind of compromise. I'll stretch my first string a little. So as you can see, I've lost 1 cent of tuning on my first string, but this way I have achieved much closer to perfect pitch on the other frets. So when you play a solo, it's even worth to recheck the actual frets you'll be using in your recording. Now let's go through the other things. So the way we play and how it affects our pitch. So to summarize the tuning process, let's just say we shouldn't trust open strings that much. We should always recheck on frets and get the best compromise to make a average good quality performance. Now there are things that we do while playing and they affect the intonation as well. First of them has been mentioned previously in one of other tips, and it has been overpressuring the note. So even if your guitar has been tuned well and you have been rechecking intonation on the frets, if you push it too hard, it will still sound out of tune. So only as much as necessary. And the second thing that also happens very often, especially while beginner plays the guitar, is to overbend the string. So don't pull it down or don't push it up while you hold a straight note. Very slightly moving the finger can create pitch issues that will destroy the quality of your performance. The condition of your strings is same important as condition of any other element of your instrument. Old and rusty strings not only lose the tone, but also the intonation. So, if you feel like your instrument has been set up properly and somehow it lost its pitch on a high fret, try to replace the string and see if the problem has been fixed. Very often it's that simple. Now, there are no hard rules on how often to change the strings. For some people, it might be a month or two and strings still seem to be reasonably fresh. For others, it can be a week or two and they look totally rusty. Now, it's all about the sweat, different kind of sweat intensity we all have, and don't try to find any hard rules on web. Be your own judge, or rather a judge of your own strings. Now, especially at the stage of being a beginner player, there are a lot of traps where you are not totally sure if you can't get the sound you want because you are doing something wrong, or because there is something wrong with your strings or the instrument. So the more factors you will remove from the technical point of instrument, the less doubts you will have while learning things. Of course, don't forget about the obvious. Strings condition depends on how intense and how often we practice. Also, how often we take our guitar outside of our home. Now, let's see how to change a string. Let's pull it through the bridge. That's quite natural. Let's prepare the key. Okay. Now, I'm leaving a little of the string on the right side of the tuner because I would like to make 1, max 2 circles around the tuner. Now I'm making 90-degree angle between the tuner and the string slot, and I'm angling the string on the tuner. Okay, and from this point I'll be holding the string with a pressure for all the process of moving it up. Okay, now I can rest it and make sure it sits well on the saddle. So once I got to the proper pitch, I cut off the end of the string and I will restretch the string until it will stay on its pitch. So let's say now it's okay. Why do I do this? Simply because if I would start to play a song, the tune will get dropped after a few notes, and this way I make sure the string will stay on its correct pitch. So in my opinion, the string is ready to be played once we stretch it enough to stop it losing the pitch. As its name says, pickup selector is just a tool to select between different pickup configurations. Now, there are no hard rules on how to use pickup selector, but there are several mistakes done by beginners that affect the overall performance and are kind of misleading while you try to judge your efficiency on particular techniques like palm muting or pinch harmonics. For example, if we play palm muted lick on a neck pickup position, it sounds a little muddy with lack of tightness and a specific middle response for palm muted runs. We need to switch to the bridge position to have exactly the tone we would like. It has to be tight, full of mid-range with a clear attack. Of course, in this particular case, when the guitar is loaded with single coil pickup, the neck position is not that muddy, but if you would have a guitar loaded with two humbuckers, you will definitely hear much more difference, and you will hear that it simply doesn't work fine. And why this is that much of a problem? Now imagine you try to master palm muting technique and you move your wrist to find the sweet spot for muting, like being a little too close to the bridge or being a little too close to the neck. Now you are trying to find the sweet spot and the perfect strength to get sweet tone of your palm muted runs. Now, if you try to catch this on a neck position, you will always find it being too muddy. And as soon as you realize that this simply doesn't work on the neck pickup, you will have less problems judging your own ability to get good tone from palm muted runs. Second thing are pinch harmonics. If we play on the bridge pickup, we can get lots of nice pinch harmonics all over the string. Now, if we try to execute the same on the neck pickup, it's not that effective anymore. So as you can hear, your pinch harmonics sound much better in the bridge pickup position. And if you're at the stage of learning how to execute pinch harmonics, this can be critical, because you might be doing everything just right, but the reason it doesn't sound the way you want is simply wrong pickup selector position. Of course, there are positions where not only one but more pickups play together, and those positions usually work best for the clean tone. They are not being used in a lot of rock and metal playing, unless of course you play blues. At some point those second and fourth position in case of Strat kind of guitars can work fine as well. But here we started to talk about the personal preferences rather than the critical meaning of your pickup selector position for the thing that you actually practice. Generally, guitar controls work the way they are described on the knobs. So we have a volume control and a tone control. Tone control is nothing else like an amount of high frequencies. And what you need to know about the passive guitar circuits, I mean those without the 9 volts battery supplied, is that the maximum position of all pots mean the natural tone of pickup. So we are not able to add, we are only able to cut off volume and frequencies, high frequencies. Now, as long as you are playing on the clean tone, it usually works just the way it's described. Now, with distortion, it's a different story, because it not only affects the final result, the final tone we hear, but also affects the way our amplifier or our distortion device reacts for our playing. So some of mistakes done by beginners is having your tone too bright, and instead of tweaking it on your amplifier, you roll off some of the treble on your guitar. And now what happens? As you can hear, with a tone rolled off to a minimum, we have lost the attack, we have lost the clarity, and we have lost a good response for our palm muting and our pinch harmonics. So it would be much better to take off the treble from your amplifier than taking off the treble from your guitar controls. Now, what happens with a volume knob? When we hit the distortion on, our volume knob becomes a gain control. So we generate the amount of signal that is going to be distorted by our amplifier. And wisely used, it can give a really great results. But for example, if you plan to be a rock or metal player, you will usually have a habit of pulling all the knobs all the way up to its maximum position to play those. That's simply because at this position your guitar will have the fullest frequency response and the fullest amount of gain available. Okay, now how to use wisely the volume knob as a gain amount control. Now, when you are playing single notes, the more gain you have, the longer sustain of the note becomes. Now, if you are planning to play in one song 2 different types of backing guitar, for example, playing chords the full amount of gain may be not a perfect solution. So you can try to find a sweet spot the sweet spot where you can catch all the notes from the chord and at the same time not oversaturate the tone. While playing solos, you can also control the dynamics of your playing. So if you want some notes to be really soft and warm, you can decide not only on the sustain amount but also overall color of your playing by adjusting the volume knob on your guitar while playing the solos. So those are examples. Now, the things that I have caught often watching beginner players was that both pickup selector and the positions of tone controls were quite random. So if you want to learn how to get a perfect palm muting tone or perfect pinch harmonics and you are doing something like this, then you can spend many hours practicing and you will still get no good results while not knowing why does this happen to you. So that's why I think that's one of most important tips for people who have their first contact with distortion. Another useful tip is to practice in front of the mirror. This way you can spot some of your issues by yourself and compare to other players. It's a totally different perspective to see guitar from a player's point and to see it from a third-person perspective. And you can easily spot some of your issues, maybe some overbent strings and hand shaping difference, resting point difference. By comparing those things to other players, you can fix them at the early point of your education and get rid of some nasty habits that would be hard to remove in the future. Random picking direction is most common cause of beginners to lose their precision or hand sync. That happens usually while playing more complex runs, especially if those are at the edge of beginner speed limit. To be clear, let's start from exceptions. There's a tonal difference between downstroke and upstroke. Playing slow phrases let us freely assign picking direction due to expected tonal results. At this point, playing comfort is not the case. For example, blues kind of rhythmized bend with upstrokes only. We can also give an example of metal palm muted riff where we use downstrokes only for that specific, even and powerful tone. Now let's get to the point. Licks that involve increased speed and string skipping demand organized picking direction. Even simple runs started from opposite stroke, upstroke instead of downstroke for example, become a new lick to be learned. That's because it changes all the right hand mechanics. String skipping moments that were comfortable become uncomfortable. Let's take a look at a simple lick at slow speed. If we started from the downstroke, our picking direction at C leads us to another string that's going to be played in a moment. If we started from an upstroke, on the C note, we move the pick in the opposite direction to the string we would like to play next. Seems unlogical, right? To explain the idea of picking direction assignment, we can refer to chord strumming mechanics. Right hand keeps moving in the air and it hits the strings only at particular moments. In this example, we use 8th note strumming pulse. No matter which of those 8th notes we would like to hit, its direction has been already determined by the right hand constant movement. Let's play a different rhythm. Notice that in this case we start to hit strings at the second strum, which is up. Yet my right hand pulse starts from the very first 8th note. This way I can improve my sync with drums or metronome. It also helps to generate direction assignment habits that later refer to alternate picking as well. Here's how it works for me. Consider that there were breaks I've been treating as a virtual pick strokes. In other words, pretending there was a note instead of a break, and its picking direction went for a waste. It happened in the air or my imagination. This way I have kept my right hand pulse, and the next note will most likely receive comfortable picking direction. Of course, there are many exceptions, including economy picking, sweep picking, and hybrid picking. One thing determines picking direction most. Those are moments when we need to skip from one string to another. That's why I can't say it will solve all of your problems, but it will definitely help, especially in many situations I've seen beginners struggling with. Left hand fingers positioning and strength management has a lot to do with playing comfort and efficiency. To clarify, let's give an example. Here's a simple 3-note lick. I'll play it twice and then we'll talk the difference. The difference were our fingers being taken away from the fretboard or being kept on the frets they've been used at before. Of course, there is no audible difference by far, but it will make sense when we put it in a wider context. The point of this tip is to keep our fingers in a sort of standby mode. Having them close to the fretboard can speed up the time of reaction and make your hands always prepared for quick shifts between notes. Doing the opposite is just unnecessary waste of strength and focus to refret the note. You've probably noticed that all those tips meet at some point. Let's then refer to making bends easier tip. I'll keep all my fingers on the frets they've been used at, and will use them all to bend the string. For example, of course, this was just a separated lick. In a mentioned wider context, for example playing a solo, this would probably lead to another phrase or lick. So let's extend our example. By resolving this phrase in this particular way, we've proven it makes sense to keep fingers where they were before. Now let's talk about position shifts. Instead of thinking only about the first note after shifting, try to think about the block of notes to be used in that particular position range. I know it's not the best comparison nowadays, but we can compare it to soldiers taking their positions and being ready to open fire once the command is given. It's same with our fretting hand. We try to think a few steps forward, positioning our fingers on the notes they may be used at. We simply execute them at wanted moments, but they were already there, awaiting command. For example, as you've seen, I've moved my hand and stretched it before I've hit any note. The same idea works when we skip from one string to another. Okay, so as a final part of this tip, I would like to share my point of view on the choice of finger operating on the middle note of 2 whole step pattern. The way how I decide to use middle or ring finger is determined by the whole pattern or lick layout. The point is to minimize the variables. In other words, to make things simpler to focus and less messy. In the major scale layout, I use my middle finger. That's because through all 6 strings, middle and pinky finger will operate always on the same frets. Only the index finger will be the variable, moving closer or further to the rest of fingers. For example, so it's through all 6 strings and index is. In the minor scale layout, I use my ring finger, because through all 6, or rather 5 strings, excluding second one, my index and ring finger will operate on the same frets, while the pinky will have to reach for additional half step or whole step. For example, so as you can see, most of the time it's. Here's an exception. So this part is constant and only my pinky finger has to reach for additional note on each string. Now, none of this is a hard rule, but sooner or later you'll probably start noticing your hands to act this way. You can speed up your progress by applying those early enough. Keep in mind you'll find exceptions, but those would need individual analysis and therefore it's impossible to include them in this video. In this tip, I would like to speak about importance of chord strumming period. In theory, it's the very first thing to be learned on guitar. In practice, a lot of impatient guitar enthusiasts start from playing solos. Why then it's so important to go through the strumming period? Well, it helps us to build our sense of groove, helps to understand and improve timing, creates solid rhythmical basis, or helps to understand and apply proper picking direction assignment later in our solo playing. The idea to direct your focus on strumming came from students who have passed on it. They got to the point when to make progress, they had to relearn things the new way. As you probably understand, it happens on many areas of life. Fixing bad habits takes more time than giving a little more attention to make things properly since the very beginning. Unfortunately, those are things you may understand when it's too late. So now it's the time to trust in experience of other players or to simply learn on others' mistakes. It doesn't mean you'll never be able to play correctly if you pass on strumming, but there's always a risk you won't be an exception. Before going any further, I need to underline that those conclusions came from my personal experience of teaching people, not only from zero, but those who started to play on their own as well. Mentioned problems became a kind of rule, so I decided to share my thoughts with you. Now about the strumming itself. If someone tells you that strumming is a hand-drawing motion applied for guitar, then he's right. From a third-person perspective, it looks like a horizontal motion of our right hand. Well, in fact, it's more a wrist rotation combined with forearm motion. Now, the faster we play, the more wrist rotation and less forearm. If we play slow, it's the opposite. The purpose is to have a regular motion with no stops. This way we can dig into the groove and keep executing a regular pulse. For strumming, we push out the wrist to make our hand hang freely. In this position, hand becomes most flexible. Unlike playing solo parts, we don't rest it on the bridge. The only resting point here is the side of guitar body. Now to execute a simple rhythm, we usually take its fastest notes and use them to establish the speed of your right hand pulse. In our first example, you'll see me moving my right hand with a pulse of 8 notes, because the fastest rhythm values here are the 8 notes. Okay, now in the second example, you'll see me executing 16th notes pulse, because the fastest rhythm value here will be the 16th note. So the pulse is... As you can see, it's all about moving our right hand with your pulse of choice, and to hit strings on some movements, and some other movements are simply being passed in the air. Now, having constant motion helps you to fit with drum beats, for example, even on the moves that are not being hit on the strings. It all creates sense of strong and weak parts of the bar, and will definitely have a good effect on your riffs and solo playing in your further skills development. Okay, so here's my amplifier, and as you can see, the settings are quite flat. That's the channel we are using at the moment. Because it's a beginner video, I'll try to avoid going in some advanced details. Let's just simply talk about things that are often problem in the way that beginners adjust the amp. My essential tip is try to make everything have a reason to be done. Let's take a look at distortion knob. On this amp it's called drive, on other amps it can be input gain, distortion, or just a gain. Different amps have different amount of gain. Never try to copy anyone just by the visual side of how the gain knob looks on his amp. The purpose of setting up the gain knob is to find a sweet spot where the saturation is on the satisfying level, yet it doesn't pull out too much of ground noise or any kind of hand moving noises on the fretboard. In my case, that's the tone for reference. If I push it up to 10, it starts to get a little muddy and brings out too much ground noise, and I think it's a little oversaturated for my taste, considering I wanted to get something between rock and metal tone. That's how things are with gain. We try to not abuse it, we try to get more gain from the hand, less gain from the amp, because it not only makes our playing cleaner, but also helps to avoid some feedback problems on stage, for example. Now let's go to EQ section. We have an adjustment of low, middle and treble frequencies. Let's always have a reason to touch each of those knobs. Try to find an argument. For example, what you set up at home is your thing while you play on the guitar alone. But once you go to the band, consider other instruments and consider how the room reacts for loud sound. So room acoustics have a lot to do with how we set up our amps. For example, if we have a small pub play a rock or metal gig at, and it's very boomy, it has a lot of bass boost, then there's nothing wrong with going totally down with our bass on our amp EQ. Because the room itself will boost those frequencies anyway. Now, mid-range. Here is the most important control for us, because guitar is a mid-focused instrument. That's where the definition of guitar tone is, and this is the part of frequency range that cuts through the mix in case of electric guitar. This one is most important for us, and let's give an example of typical mistake done by beginners. So at the first point, as a beginner, we'll kind of used to guitar tone known from recordings of our favorite players, of our idols. They are being played on a computer speakers or cheap PA. So when we buy our first amplifier, it often happens to make the lows go way up, the mids go way down, and the treble go way up, because that's how we hear the guitar in the mix. At least that's how we suppose it sounds. And what happens is something like... So let's say this is a kind of tone you can enjoy at home, being a little above the cabinet of your amp. And this is the kind of tone that will totally not work in the band. Let me tell you why. Because the amount of lows will get covered by the bass drum or the bass guitar. The treble will get covered by the cymbals, for example, or partially with the vocals as well. The worst thing you can do to your audience is to kick them with high amount of treble. You know, standing a little above the amp and close to it makes you not able to hear the real amount of treble that is in your tone. So before making it in this position, make sure to go a few feet or a few meters in front of your amp and take a listen of what you are serving to your audience. You may be surprised. So for me, that's the perfect point to start with. And if you decide to touch any of those snaps, try to find yourself a reason to do so. Try to ask yourself, is my guitar covering the bass? Is my guitar cutting through the mix? Has my guitar a good clarity, or my guitar is a kind of fizzy and unpleasant for my audience? So those are the reasons to touch the EQ, and if you're always trying to find yourself an argument to do so, your adjustments will be verified by what's happening in your band. You may think, why to learn theory if you're not planning to become a member of classical symphonic orchestra? Well, consider music being a language. What we hear is a language of emotions, but there is an additional language. It's the music theory. It makes us able to communicate within each other. By us, I mean musicians. It's same important skill as knowing essentials of foreign language when you plan to travel abroad. Being able to say exactly what you need seems to look better than a random gesticulation while trying to show an item you can't name. Once you grow up to a moment when you realize you need it, you may be surprised by its amount. It may take a while and a few approaches before you'll make yourself go through all this. If you just started to play guitar, it's a perfect moment to start learning theory step by step. Assimilating little pieces in a longer time distance is definitely more friendly. Theory not only makes us able to name things and clearly communicate with other musicians, it also helps us to explore the skills we already have more efficiently. So what can you do to avoid the feeling of getting bored like learning history book for an exam? First of all, start naming notes you play. Look at your left hand and try to find the name of what you press on each string. You can easily find the notes on the fretboard templates in the net. Say it loud at least twice. For example, C. C note on the 8th fret. G. G note on the 5th string on the 10th fret. By doing this, you won't learn within a day or two, but in a long-term process, you'll find yourself being able to name more and more positions on the fretboard without a moment of hesitation. Second thing, get familiar with rhythm values. They are very useful while you try to share particular rhythm with other members of your band. Naming it precisely can clarify things and resolve all doubts. This way, you and your friends will be perfectly sure what you mean to play. It will definitely boost the quality of your performance. Now, here's an example of how theory helps to extend our comfort zone on the fretboard. I assume those of you who started to play improvised solos feels most comfortable in minor keys, usually A, D, or E minor. Playing over major keys seems to be a little weird at first, especially when it's most probably the blues pentatonic you've met by far. Now, let's say you've pushed yourself one step forward and you know at least the fingers layout for a complete minor scale in one position. Let's give an example of A minor scale. What if I would ask you to play over C major key? Knowing just a little of theory can help. In this example, a theory of major scale and its modes will help us. Natural minor scale is a scale built on the 6th step of major scale. So let's play a major scale, C major, and let's count to 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I continue to play next 7 notes starting from this one, notes from a C major shape, I'll get the A minor scale. In other words, if we take all the notes from C major and play them starting from 6th note, which is A note, and keep playing next 7 notes from C major, considering we don't close up within 1 octave, then the scale you'll hear will be the natural minor scale. So again we have but those notes are taken from the shape for C major. To make it sound like A minor, we need to start from A note and finish on the A note in the next octave. But for improvisation purpose, we only need to know which note names are correct for the key, and those are the same notes for both C major and A minor. Even if this still sounds a little confusing, the only thing you need to remember is that A minor has been made of exactly the same set of notes as C major. Translating it further, we can say that to improvise over C major song, you can simply use most of stuff you know that works for A minor. It works the same for all major scales, so we can create a hard rule. Every major scale has a minor scale being made of exactly the same notes, and to find it, we need to count 3 frets down from a root major scale note. The note we count from is our 0, to be clear. So let's give a few examples to make sure you get it right. So here we have a C, which is a root note of C major scale, and I'll count down 3 frets. So 0, -1, -2, -3. So here under my index finger I have the name of note, which is the root note of minor scale being done with exactly the same notes as this major scale. To give another example, we can count down from G. So we have a G major, 0, -1, -2, -3. So here we have an E note. So when your friend asks you to play a solo over A major key, for example, you can simply launch all your favorite pentatonic licks, moving to the 2nd position. Minor pentatonic started from 2nd fret. This is just a piece of knowledge that asks for even more explanations and maybe pointing out some exceptions like a major blues, which is not that major at all. But this short part of theory makes you realize how things become connected with each other. Let's be honest. Most of us bought our first instrument relying more on the look than its average tonal and manual value. It seems to be natural. We watch our guitar idols and we think buying what they use will bring us closer to the sound they get. We forget that the overall tone is a matter of a player himself and the full chain of sound devices he uses. Guitar is just one piece of the chain. Personally, I see nothing wrong with buying the guitar that looks cool to us. It's a kind of dream coming true and additional motivation to play even more. At the same time, we can waste our money if we don't consider a few things. So, first of all, it is always worth to ask for help. If there's an experienced player available to go with you and recheck a few instruments at your local store, then go for it. If this can be a person with similar musical taste or simply a kind of your authority, then it's even better. Don't be surprised if he denies your default choice. He may listen to your expectations and explain what and why would or wouldn't work in your case. He can also detect some issues that you, as a beginner, are not able to detect yet. Second thing, guitars are not like cell phones or computers. You can't just choose the model referring to catalogs, technical specification, or opinions from the internet. Each piece is different. Your faraway friend being satisfied with his particular model is no guarantee that the one you'll order will work same well. Wood is not a perfect fabric. It reacts to temperature and humidity changes. 10 pieces of the same model can act totally different. That's why choosing from limited amount of instruments available to be physically verified is often worth much more than tons of various models you can order remotely. Now, the third thing, simplicity. As a beginner, you would not like to be distracted by tons of elements you're not sure how to use yet. You need to focus on developing your playing skills instead of wondering why some piece of gear doesn't work the way you've seen on YouTube. I believe that an instrument with Floyd Rose type of tremolo is not the best choice for your first one. This kind of tremolo demands some servicing skills to work properly. Consider that breaking a string or detuning one of them will always affect the pitch of other ones. If you plan to play songs with 6th string dropped down to a lower note, then you may lose your patience retuning all strings all over until string tension gets balanced with tremolo springs tension here on the back. So here's a guitar with a Floyd Rose type of tremolo. It's a licensed version, not the original Floyd Rose, but it's enough to give an example of what happens with this kind of bridges. So at the moment, strings are locked on both sides, and I can freely use the whammy bar without the loss of pitch. And things works just fine. Now, let's say one of the songs of my band are being created for a drop D tuning. What I have to do with my guitar, I have to release the locking on the headstock. Let's say it's okay. And try to detune the string. As you can hear, when I'm changing the tension of 6th string, all other strings react, so I'm not able to get all 6th string in a perfect tune. Of course, that is possible, but it will take a lot of time, and I'm sure it doesn't work in a live conditions or on a soundcheck. You can play things like this at home. But also the position of your bridge will change because it's always being set up the way the springs on the back balance the tension of strings. But the tension of strings depends on the tuning, right? So let's retune our guitar back to regular E. Let's lock down the headstock locking. Okay. Let's retune on the fine tuners. Okay. And let's go to another example to show what happens on bands. So, as I mentioned, adjusting the tension of one string affects the others. So, making bends is nothing else like changing the tension of a string. So, I'll fret two notes and bend one of them. Now, I'll play only the one that is not being bent to show you what happens with it. That means that when you're bending while holding one solid note, this will not be in tune with the rest of the band. Also, depending on the tension of springs as well, or the number of springs, the bridge itself is also floating, so if we are not careful enough, we can detune the guitar just by pressing it too much. For example, of course, there are some solutions. Tools like tremolo or hip-shot drumsetter have been designed to fix strings detuning while bending problem or to lock down the bridge at the moments you would like to. Those are an additional expense though, and they still don't make double locking tremolo as simple to use as a hardtail bridge. I will not try to create any hard rules, but those suggestions are based on my experience from work at the music shop. I've seen a lot of beginners giving back the instruments they thought were a best choice, especially those with Floydrose kind of tremolo. They thought there was something wrong with the setup, for example. But once proven everything was just fine, they admitted something had to be done wrong by their side. As a final tip, I would like to share some of my thoughts on left-handed players. Now, before we start, I have to underline that this is very, and I mean very subjective. But I have a few friends, professional players, who are left-handed, yet they play on the right-handed instruments. And why would I like to give this to your consideration? Let's think of a piano. How do you think? Are there any left-handed piano players out there? Of course they are. But have you ever seen a left-handed piano? I didn't. Now, how does this refer to a guitar? At the point zero, starting to play on the instrument, we are all a kind of blank piece of paper. And if you're left-handed and start to play right-handed instrument, the availability of instruments in the shops will be much bigger than while trying to choose between limited models being done in left-handed versions, and those usually are a little more expensive. So that's the very first thing you will struggle with. Now, at some point of our guitar adventure, both of our hands have to be same efficient. So, watching those of my friends who choose to play the right-handed instruments, I had those thoughts that maybe saying you that this choice being done at the very beginning of your guitar adventure can affect all of your further guitar life. So please rethink things before buying your first instrument.